What's the #1 nutrient deficiency in your crop? Well, the answer may surprise you. Tonight, experts from Helena Agri-Enterprises discuss the top nutrients to keep an eye on this season as they reveal extractor tissue samples from various crops around the country.
Good evening and welcome to Rural America Live. I'm Marlon Bowling. Well, knowing what your crops need can make all the difference on your operations, which is why research like Helena Agribusiness is doing is so critical. Now, I want to welcome our first guest agronomist, Matt Boyer, and agri-intelligence specialist, Dustin MacArthur. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
And right off the bat, I should have said Helena Agri-Enterprises, so my
That's
apologies
okay. It's
for
a
that.
brand new name for us.
It is a bit of a mouthful, but I'm glad you guys made it in to explain everything about what you're doing, and it can be a lot of stuff going on. So, Matt, if you would, I'll get to you first here. Give me a little idea about your background and how you ended up in the position you're at in Helena.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So my name is Matt Boyer. I'm an agronomist with Helena. I grew up in Northeast Iowa, and I'm now based out of North Central Iowa, so just a little ways away. I cover Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, and Wisconsin. And I've actually been with Helena for about 14 years, and I started way back when I was actually an intern with one of the first classes that we had.
Very nice. So you cover a pretty good-sized territory.
A lot of road time.
Yeah, 14 years?
Yep, last month actually.
And I assume since the growing season is underway, you're already getting pretty busy, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So your specialty is the agronomic point of view, right?
Yep.
With the company. All right, so if that's the case, then let's go ahead and move on to Dustin here for a second. And Dustin, explain how you got to where you are and what you specialize in.
Well, like Matt said, thank you for having us tonight on your program. My name's Dustin MacArthur. I grew up in West Tennessee. After graduating from the University of Tennessee at Martin with a degree in ag business, I was offered a job at Helena at Humboldt, Tennessee. My first 6 years with Helena, I worked at 3 different retail locations. My last stint was in Mason, Tennessee, where I was an agri-intelligence technician and a crop consultant. The main crops that I focused on were cotton and soybeans. In 2017, I was grateful to accept the job that I'm currently in today, which is an agri-intelligence information specialist. The territory that I cover and help support is Western Tennessee, Western Kentucky, Southeast Missouri, and a small portion of Northeast Arkansas. My main role with Helena is to help train our agri-intelligence personnel at the locations, along with, selling and supporting our agri-intelligence products line, which includes High Ground, which is our soil management program, True Yield, which is our yield data analysis, along with Extractor, which is something that we'll be discussing tonight, and our imagery platform.
So pretty high caliber stuff you're working with, right?
Been with Helena for 12 years as of yesterday.
Oh my gosh! Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So we have a lot of experience just between the two of you here. I mean, that's already 26 years plus of experience. Matt, I want to start with you then on the discussion here. You guys do so much research, and I just wondered what the numbers all mean. What do our viewers at home need to know about the nutrients in their crops? And you work with numerous crops too, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
So over the past 3 years, we've taken over 150,000 tissue samples all across the country.
Wow.
And we've seen some interesting trends emerge across several crops. So we always expect nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to be limiting at some level, but the interesting part is how they rank in regards to most to least deficient, as well as when the secondary and micronutrients start to show up.
So when you get all these findings, why are they so significant to our producers?
Yeah, so let's talk about corn, first of all, right? Let's use that as an example, which, by the way, about 1/3 of our samples are taken from corn, so we have a pretty large sample size.
Okay.
So typically when we think about corn, nitrogen comes to mind. We think that would probably be the most limiting nutrient,
right?
But our data actually is showing us that potassium is the most deficient nutrient, followed closely by nitrogen and then phosphorus. And then the 4th most efficient nutrient in corn, which is kind of surprising, is actually magnesium.
So Matt just shared some interesting details about that. And then you use what you call an extractor. If you would, can you explain that to our audience, what that is and how does that all fit into all this?
Yeah, so our agri-intelligence tool for going out and tissue sampling our growers' fields is called Extractor. And Extractor is Helena's exclusive tissue sample program. We use it in conjunction with our agri-intelligence software that is web-based, as well as can be accessed through a mobile app. So what we normally try to do is go out and scout growers' fields for them, collect tissue samples to provide the grower some type of value in season, to show him, to help him monitor crop health, to address certain nutrient deficiencies. And our goal with that is to help the grower make any adjustments in season that are needed, or to help him create a better fertilizer prescription moving forward.
So you're working with tissue samples. Now, of course, that's been around for a while, but what is it that makes Extractor different then?
So I think there are really multiple factors that make Extractor different from a normal tissue sample program or composite tissue sampling. I think the number one thing that separates it from the rest is our professional agronomists that we have at Helena. Helena is a very agronomy-focused company. We have over 16 regional agronomists, such as Matt, that are constantly vetting our sufficiency ranges to make sure that we are keeping up with current yield trends and current things that we are seeing through the data. So they're doing a lot of this behind the scenes with data analysis. They're doing a lot of it through current university research, as well as their years of experience. And I think really the next thing that makes Extractor different is we try to utilize multiple data sets on a particular grower's farm or field. We're trying to identify areas of significance or areas of importance that we really need to highlight or make sure that we collect these tissue samples on so that we can give the grower a story. That's kind of our goal, is to let the grower understand that we might have seen this issue come back in high ground, which is our soil sample information. We want to follow that out through looking at imagery, see if there's any biomass correlations in the plant, and then we'll follow that up with a tissue sample to kind of tell the grower a complete story from start to finish. Next, I think the biggest thing that separates us is our professional employees that are trained to go out and collect this data and communicate it back to their growers. Mm-hmm. They have a large support team that helps them, but we have a lot of trainings for them to understand how to go out in the field, properly collect these samples, and properly communicate it back to the grower so that the grower will have the opportunity to make the best possible find the best possible solution for his acre.
Okay, so let's do a little role playing here. I'm a farmer. I'm a customer out there, and I want to sign up for Extractor.
Yes.
What takes place? What would I expect to happen then after I sign up for that?
Well, I would first tell the grower to expect something that is very thorough. We're going to try to be as in-depth as possible with this Extractor program. But first and foremost, I would tell the grower to reach out to his local Helena representative and kind of share with him what his direction is, what his goals are for his operation, and if he's seeing any current issues. The next step that would take place is the agri-intelligence representative at the location would dive into our AI 360 platform to see if we have any certain data that we can better locate areas in the field of interest or focus that I mentioned just a second ago, to kind of really find those areas that we need to highlight for these tissue sample collections. If we don't have tissue samples on a grower, if we don't have data on a grower, our normal process would be to try to get imagery in on his farm or field so that we can really kind of direct where we need to go and find that variability through that NDVI image so that we can better provide some results for the grower. So our agri-intelligence representative, once these points have been identified, they will go out in the field, and depending on the crop and the growth stage, they're going to collect the certain plant parts that we need to collect for these tissue samples. They'll send them off to the lab. Generally it will take about 1 to 2 days for the lab to get the analysis of the tissue samples. Once those are completed, our Helena representatives will get an Extractor report. Once that Extractor report comes in, the support team, maybe the salesman or the agri-intelligence representative at the location will go over that Extractor report, analyze it from all angles, and provide and communicate that to the grower. Kind of what he needs to do, what his current issues are, things to look at moving into the future.
Gosh, I remember back in the old days when I was farming, and you had to wait agonizingly for snail mail to get the results back to you. That's a thing of the past, I'm hoping.
Yes, it is. That's one great feature with our AI360 is that, and while we're utilizing it, is we pull the tissue samples within the software. The tissue sample results, as soon as they're completed, are coming back into our software. So we instantly have those results once they're completed at the lab.
And you have, if I understand correctly, you have a bit of a, without getting too technical, you have kind of a proprietary way of gathering that information. Is that right? In the way you gather the samples?
Well, I think that's part of us utilizing multiple data sets. You know, we have some proprietary things with our yield data zones that we can create with our high ground platform and a lot of our recommendations that we look at. But a lot of the proprietary part of it is inside of our agri-intelligence software called AI360 that we have a lot of benefit with easily identifying those zones of influence on a field that we really need to pay attention to in season, or zones that may be possibly negatively impacting yield that we really need to focus on in season so that we don't let that deter our potential return on the acre at the end of the year.
All right, Matt, we were talking before we came on the air here about some things you've been working on. And we're already in the growing season, and I know you've been doing some sampling, and you're just kind of now getting into it pretty hard for this year. But you've been doing this for several years.
Yep.
And I just wondered, last year was a bit of an unusual year. We're getting off to a bit of a weird year this year, too. But what kind of clues are you seeing from the samples you have taken on corn up to this point?
Yeah, so far this year, obviously a lot of the country is seeing some abnormally dry conditions, or at least drier than normal. So as expected, we're kind of struggling to get potassium in some of these plants. Corn specifically has a really rapid uptake pattern for potassium, up to 5 pounds of potassium per acre per day. So we just want people to make sure that they're focusing on that and making sure that they're able to meet the demands of their crops.
So in contrast to that, then what have you been finding when it comes to soybeans, like from last year to this year?
Yep. So for the past 3 years, it's really been a tale of two nutrients in soybeans. So that would be potassium again and sulfur. Early in the season, sulfur is the leading nutrient deficiency that we see in soybeans, followed closely by potassium. But then when we get to the mid-reproductive stages, they kind of flip-flop, with potassium becoming the most efficient, followed closely by nitrogen, and then sulfur is the third most efficient. And the interesting thing about this, when we look at tissue samples chronologically, is not only do we get to identify the nutrients that we need or that are needed, but we also can determine when we need to be supplementing or making sure that we have the nutrients out there for that plant.
And it's, I mean, nowadays, you know, with the internet and everything and email and just electronic results, I mean, it's almost real time. Yeah. I mean, like you say, you get the lab samples in what, a day or two, something like that. There's not much wait time, and you can respond very quickly now.
No, absolutely. And there's ways of kind of combining them and looking at the big picture stuff, right? Because you can get a lot of samples in a short amount of time, and we aren't necessarily worried about the one-off here or there, but we want to be able to help as many people as we can.
Okay, so we covered corn, we covered soybeans. Do you deal with cotton at all?
I know a little bit about the nutrient deficiencies over the past 3 years, but luckily we got this guy over here who can actually walk through them a little bit.
You're you hail from the south anyway, right?
I am.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. Born in West Tennessee.
What are we finding in cotton then?
So I think the biggest trend on cotton that probably most of our viewers already realize is potassium. You know, whenever you're talking about a 1,500 pound cotton crop that's going to uptake anywhere between 220, 250 pounds of K to make that yield, you know, we're going, any little stress or any mismanagement of potassium could really throw that plant into some type of nutrient deficiency or any type of stress. So really, I think addressing the potassium correctly is a big thing. And we really see that really kick in around early bloom, even into mid bloom. I think the cotton varieties have really started to improve over the last 5 to 10 years. With some of the new genetics and some of the yield potential that they are possessing. So I think a lot of the guys that deal in cotton every year understand what nitrogen rate works best for their management style. And I think a lot of them are addressing P and K the best that they can. But with these new varieties that are coming out and us really starting to push some yield, I think the growers should start really focusing on sulfur, zinc, calcium, and magnesium. Those are really big 4 nutrients that are coming kind of second to potassium. So Really whenever you start getting into early bloom, I would really like to highlight that a cotton grower go out and let us pull some tissue samples on his farm to really see how sulfur, zinc, calcium, and magnesium are playing as a role in that plant during the growing season.
So like you say, you've been doing this, 12 years or more?
Yes, sir.
If you're talking cotton, the first thing I think of is the problems they've had in northern Texas, where they grow a lot of cotton.
Right.
Terrible drought for like 3 years. If that's the case, is that going to impact the way you treat that crop this year because of the chemicals it may or may not have used last year?
Well, I think it all depends on their management style and how they have addressed that acre that's not going to be currently in production. I know a lot of them are dealing with that drought scenario. I know a lot of them really don't like to put out a lot of their nutrients until they know that they're going to have a rain, or they're not going to start planting until they know they have adequate moisture. So sometimes you can look at maybe we're applying a nutrient a little bit late and we're going to have a void there before that nutrient could possibly be available to the plant. And so anytime we're going through a situation like that, I think it is critical to make sure that during those vital growth stages, we are addressing the nitrogen and the potassium and the things like sulfur and zinc specifically.
So that dovetails over into the wheat area, and I understand you guys work with wheat too. Of course, that's another major crop, but there again, the drought-plagued plains out there, I mean, it's a total failure in some areas out there, and this is like the third year running. So I just wondered, Matt, do you deal with the wheat at all?
Get into wheat a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll ask either one of you then, what are you finding when it comes to the wheat?
So over the past 3 years, looking at the nutrient deficiency side of things there, the real story has been boron, right?
Really?
Almost every growth stage except for one, boron has been the largest nutrient deficient nutrient that we found.
Really?
Yep.
So what do you do about that?
Well, we have some ways that we can use soil fertility that we can boost it, and there's some foliar options as well. But the bottom line is we need to address boron if we want to get the yields that we're shooting for.
So then, all right, Dustin, you work with the system that does all the analysis of the tissue samples that come in. What do you do with all these numbers? I mean, that is an incredible amount of data. What does the farmer do, or what does the Helena representative have to do with these numbers?
So I think what we try to do is try to find the best trends that match their geography, and try to simplify it the best that we can. So we have an easy reporting tool. We have extractor summaries that we can run that can really dive into a salesman or a grower specific area or their own farm, looking at their tissue sample analysis over time. The extractor report is extremely user-friendly. We're dealing with a report that is easy to capture where our deficiencies lay, and it's very easy to see where we might be sufficient or even in excess. Another thing that I like to hit on about our extractor reports is, not only are you able to see where your current deficiencies are and where your nutrients rank in concentration of the plant, but you're also able to look out at the next growth stage and see if my nutrient concentration stayed the same, then at this next growth stage that's coming up, that's something that's going to be of concern, and it'll highlight that. And so I really think the way that we're able to manage this amount of tissue samples is with our experienced professionals that are embedded at the locations that deal with agri-intelligence products like Extractor every day. The salesmen are heavily involved, and it takes a lot of communication. But we have a great support team. Like I said, we have 16 agronomists that are constantly looking at the tissue samples. There's 6 more of my counterparts just in the South. So Helena's made a great investment in that agronomy type role to make sure that when the data is collected, the data will be communicated efficiently.
So you can come up with a custom tailored match for nutrition needs for your crop out there, but you guys did a great job of pointing out that it varies from the time of year, from
Absolutely.
one crop stage to the next on what nutrients that it really needs. We do need to take a break. We could talk about this all day, I'm sure, but we're going to take a quick break. But before we go, I want to make sure that we're going to open up our phone lines. So if you have a question for these folks, you can call us toll free. Jot this number down, would you? It's 877-731-6733. Again, 877-731-6733. 888-848-8833, and you can talk with the experts from Helena Agri-Enterprises, and they'll give you answers live right on the phone. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Rural America Live. I'm Marlon Bowling with you. We want to welcome a new guest to our panel tonight. Well, we're now joined by Technical Services Manager, Dr. Greg Willoughby, who is also with Helena Agri-Enterprises. Welcome. How are you?
Doing fine.
Good to have you on board. So we're expanding our panel here. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to give you the same treatment I gave these guys over here. They went through the gauntlet. Give us a little about your background and how you ended up where you are here.
All right. So I have been with Helena for 21 years. I'm a technical service manager. And basically, I work in a couple different roles. I oversee some of the research that's being done in my geography. I work with universities, private research contractors, in doing so. And I cover everything from Colorado all the way to Ohio and the Dakotas down through Kansas, Missouri, and Kentucky. And then I get to work with great people like this in the field and help do training with them, educate our sales force, and work with growers and customers. Got to Helena from Purdue University. I was director for Purdue's Crop Diagnostic Training and Research Center.
Okay.
And got that after I finished my PhD there. But I'm originally from South Central Kentucky, a little town called Scottsville. Went to Western Kentucky University, go Hilltoppers.
Yeah,
and
I know it will.
Grew up on a tobacco and dairy farm. So grew up milking cows and still actually have the dairy operation going today.
Okay, so on the panel, we have corn, we have soybeans, we have cotton, we have wheat, we have tobacco covered in experience. So kind of touching all the bases right here. And I know there are other crops that all of you work with as well. Okay, so these guys talked with me in the first segment here about Extractor. Right. And the tool that is so valuable to producers out there. And you work with it too. Now, when you get the results from Extractor and it feeds its way back to the producer out there, explain what happens with that information from your angle now.
Okay. So Extractor results are looked at two different ways. Number one is when a farmer operation has had several years of Extractor, we can actually start taking a picture of what the needs are from his general farming operations, and which would involve the soils that he farms, the climate that he farms, the varieties he selects, and so forth. We also look at the bigger picture of what's happening from the standpoint of that geography, so the more regional standpoint. And from those, that's kind of sets the precedent of how we would develop that farmer's recommendation across the board on a year-by-year basis. Then in season, when those results come in, we can dictate those results that are happening because of weather extremes or because of some other external factor. And then Extractor gives us those product recommendations to help us correct those issues that may develop. The thing we have to realize is that soil fertility, so our soil test reports, are not the nutrition that the plant may see during the season. So we talk about fertility in the soil and we talk about nutrition of the plant. And those two things oftentimes don't go hand in hand. And so we use Extractor to try to see that snapshot of what the plant's actually seeing coming out of the soil versus what it maybe should be needing out of the soil that it can't get.
Now I have to ask you myself, as an old veteran farmer from years ago back in the caveman days, but when you add nutrients to a crop thinking that that's what it needs, they're not all immediately available. I mean, you have to get the timing right.
Right, and that's one of the things that we've worked a lot with Extractor and looking at relationships and tracking some of these tissues all the way through yield through AI 360 is looking to see, okay, when was this nutrient problematic in that field? And if we corrected it with a Helena product, how did that actually transition into the end bushel? So we're able to make those connections, and that's where our product recommendations come from when we get an Extractor report back.
So what options do you think are working the best right now?
So as Matt said, our biggest issues have typically been when we look at those reports on the macronutrient side. I mean, macronutrients are called macro because they're the thing the plant uses in the largest scenario.
Okay.
But when we get into like potassium issues, like you mentioned, or sulfur issues, we have to address those things first and foremost to get those things corrected. Past that point, then we can start looking at the micronutrients, and they're more like the fine tuning. That's where we get those extra bushels that we often look for when we're really trying to push fields that have high yield potential.
Well, we do have a phone call on the line, and I want to encourage you to call in too. We have a toll-free number, and if you haven't jotted it down, the number is popping up on your screen here right now. There it is, right there, 877-731-6733. Jot it down, and you can call in to our panelists as well. We have Clay calling in from Tennessee. Clay, thanks for your call. What's your question?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I guess I got a question for Dustin. You talking potassium, zinc, and cotton, but kind of what's your extractor program there? How do I need to be going and pulling those samples, and what's your program? What time do I need to be pulling those? How many times do I need to be pulling those, and then how do I answer that?
Great questions.
Very good question. So I think, again, it goes back to what that farmer's direction or goal is for that acre. In cotton, we are lucky to have a lot of application opportunities that we don't necessarily have in corn or soybeans. So some guys are going across the field 6 to 10 times throughout the growing season to control plant height with plant regulators or for pest. So what I tell is, I really think in cotton, it is extremely important that we look at that first bloom window to at least the 2 to 3 weeks after first bloom. I really think that is where we can make some big adjustments in season to really make a big impact on his cotton yield potential, and really kind of fine tune some of those things that could be negatively affecting his yield opportunity on that acre. But I would recommend to go out, like I said, around early bloom, and possibly, 3 or 4 days before he's going to possibly make an application.
On the calendar, I know the cotton belt is not that widespread of a belt, but on the calendar, what time of year are you talking?
So generally, we're looking in our area, we hope to have cotton at bloom by July the 4th.
Okay.
Sometime in that frame is generally where we'll start having a lot of our cotton at bloom. This year, I would expect it to be similar to that, with some staggering into first bloom around July the 15th, especially for the Boot Hill, Missouri, and the Western Tennessee market.
Does the producer need to get the sample? Does your Helena representative get it?
No, he just needs to contact the Helena representative and let him know that he is wanting to get some extractor tissue samples pulled on his farm, and we'll be glad to go out there and collect those for him. Again, I think it's about him communicating what he wants out of these tissue samples. Is there an issue he's trying to fix? Is there something he's really wanting to strive after? Is it more yield? Is it better nutrient decisions in season? Whenever our agri-intelligence personnel are out there, I think a big advantage is, we're also scouting the field. We're not just going to go to a directed tissue sample spot and collect a tissue sample and send it off to the lab. We're out there looking for certain growth stages. We're looking for certain pests or disease or possible nutrient deficiencies that are already in the field. I think there's a lot of value going out with a crop, especially like cotton. Our dry fertilizers, commodity prices are still relatively high from where they normally are.
Sure. And
so, anything that we can do in season to help make up for maybe some of those reduced rates that we could have looked at last year or this year can really help drive some of the yield potential and return on the acre.
All right, great question. Thanks for calling in. I appreciate that. And again, I'll remind you, you can call in too if you have a question for our Helena panel. Just call 877-731-6733 if you've got questions. In fact, we have another caller on the line. Hank is calling in from Nebraska. Good to have you with us. Hank, thanks for calling. What's your question?
Yes. How can you get your corn, soybeans to better utilize what little water we have? Because where I'm at, it is bone dry this year.
Ooh, good question. Who wants that one? Greg, do you want that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So anytime we deal with drought stress, and obviously some areas of the country like yourself has more stress events than others, But when we do that, the elements that's going to limit production the most are going to be those elements that are delivered by water. And potassium leads that. Sulfur fits into that. And supplying those elements from a foliar application, because it can't get it through the soil, will help bridge that gap. We can do fertility by foliar applications when the soil just can't supply it because it doesn't have the method to do it. The other thing that fits into that is there's a lot of biological products that are out there on the market now that are typically designed to handle stress, and they are designed from research and technology and looking at gene mapping and genomics to figure out exactly what plant extracts, if you will, that can be applied that helps that plant weather through that stress event.
I heard you mention something called resgenics. What is that?
So that would be another option or management tool. Resgenics is a type of polymer that we can put through irrigation systems, or we can actually can now apply it through a normal spray rig with your ag chem applications. And it actually helps the soil, what little moisture it may get, helps pull that moisture into the soil, helps move it to a lower or to a deeper depth, and helps the soil store it so we don't have as much evaporative loss or we don't have erosion moving off the field. So we can actually increase the moisture content after a rain event or an irrigation event more now than what we could have without resgenics being applied.
So that's another Helena product
It
of
is,
the many
yes.
hundreds that you have. How long has that been on the market now?
So actually resgenics has only been on the market for a year. So it's very new. The technology has been around for decades, but it's been the delivery system that's been the problem. And we have finally figured out a way to do that where it doesn't require any special equipment other than what you normally would have on a normal irrigator or spray rig, and be able to use just traditional equipment to be able to apply it.
How long do you think that would last in the field?
So depending on the circumstances, we typically talk about every 3 to 4 weeks would need a reapplication. So usually we can get through 3 to 4 applications a season, depending on when the water starts getting short or what the rain events may be.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can stump you here. Here's another term that I heard you mention, ENC technology. Okay. All right, tell us what that is.
So as we just talked about the biological piece with the gentleman, ENC is some technology. It actually started as an individual product over 30 years ago. And it had a nutritional analysis and it had a biological component. And we were able to finally take that biological component, pull it out. It's called Elemax Nutrient Concentrate.
Oh, I see why you call it ENC. All right.
And so hence the name. And we now have that as a formulation technology, and we're able to put that in with other elements. So for example, our Coron Metra brands are our nitrogen brands that have ENC formulation technology in it. Our Elemax product line, several of those that are on the macronutrients, the phosphoruses, the potassiums, the sulfurs, have that technology in it. So we're able to do a little bit of both, and being able to do some stress mitigation, and it has some other properties too as we're applying that nutrient.
All right, I just want to remind everybody again, there's a toll-free number that is appearing on your screen. If you look at that, you can jot it down. Very important stuff we're talking about here tonight from the folks at Helena, and you can join the conversation too. If you have some questions you want to fire at the panel here, feel free. It's toll-free, 877 and 731-6733 if you want to join the program and get your questions answered for free from some experts tonight. Now, we've talked about some crop nutrient deficiencies. Are there some that we haven't covered yet, or have we pretty much touched on them all? What's your experience?
So we've hit the big ones.
Okay.
Like I said, the macronutrients, but we have these micronutrients, and they're called micro for a reason. They're used in very small quantities. I like to talk about it from a standpoint of an engine. Okay, you have the gas and the oil, and that's the macronutrients. That's the phosphorus, the potassium, and the sulfur. But when you get into the micronutrients, that's more like the grease of the wheels and the right here we go. So 3 of those on the screen: the boron, the copper, and the zinc. Are all micronutrients, And those help, if you will, lubricate the gears. They help the engine run more efficiently.
All right.
And so as we start pushing yields and we're trying to get more and more out of that soil environment, those micronutrients become more and more important. And so in that line, we have several products that have those. Our kickstand product line and our Axolo product line contain all of our micronutrients. And then boron is supplied somewhat in those lines. And then we also have boron in some of our Coron Metras type products as well.
We had kind of a little powwow before we came on the air live here tonight. And you were talking about the fact that you have these biological options available to producers. Can you give us maybe a sample and name a few?
So from our world, we've kind of taken that ENC Formulation Tech, and we've kind of developed that into even another level. So we've took a nutrient pack that's got nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, has some micronutrients, and then we've put that with it. And then we have put another product that is in this plant extract category, and it's called Orbix. So it's kind of like an all-for-one kind of deal. It gives you a broad picture of a nutrient portfolio to help move that yield envelope higher. It has the formulation technology that helps with compatibility. It helps with absorption, and it helps with crop safety. And then on top of that, then we throw in these plant extractants that we have done a lot of research on over the years that tends to activate genes that are signaling that when there's a stress event occurring and trying to limit the production. And this product called Orbix helps alleviate those signals so that the plant doesn't think it's in as much stress as what it is, so it can continue to grow and yield.
Okay, that's a new one on me. Plant extracts. What led you to go down that trail anyway?
So remarkably, plant extracts are one of those things that have been in the agriculture industry for years. It's just no one really talked about them. Plant extracts come mainly from seaweed, although there are other plants that they extract things from.
Really? You guys look anywhere.
Yeah, anywhere. And actually about over a third of the world market contains a product that comes from these plant extracts. It's the largest growing sector of biologicals in the world is plant extracts. So we're in that chase too. We're trying to lead that pack. And it makes sense. If a plant is under stress and something's going to make it feel better, it's going to recognize if it came from another plant rather than out of some chemistry bottle sitting on a lab bench.
Well, this is fascinating stuff. Seaweed and everything. I thought we had all the crops covered here. And we threw seaweed in there too yet. I'm going to throw the director a curve here. But anyway, I'll remind you about our toll-free number. And I want to remind you about a website that you can visit too. Maybe they can put that up on the screen. But the toll-free phone number, if you want to join the conversation tonight, it's 877-731-6733. Write it down. Tell a friend. Maybe they've got a question and they can call in too. Also, if you want to check out the website, it's Helena Agri. That's HelenaAgri.com, and you can get all kinds of information there too. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more on Rural America Live. So good to have you with us here on Rural America Live. I'm Marlon Bowling with you, and we're talking with the folks from Helena Agri-Enterprises. They are with us talking about all things related to tissue sampling and all the products that they have to offer. And from what I understand, there are hundreds. You'll have to check it out. You can go to their website, HelenaAgri.com. That's HelenaAgri.com if you want to learn more. And we'll talk about it in a little bit. They also have a cool podcast that you can check out too. We'll see if we can pry that out of them in a little bit. In the meantime, I know we have several callers on the line. We have Steve on the line from Wisconsin. And Steve, before we bring you on, I just want to remind everybody, if you want to call in, here's that number. Once again, 877-731-6733. And you can join the program too. All right, Steve, thanks for calling in. What's your question?
Yeah, I have had narrow leaves on my young corn plants for several years.
I typically put in like 5 gallons of 624-6 in furrow and 28 with thiazole and micronutrients in furrow. And I was wondering if you was to guess, what do you think is causing my young corn plants to have kind of narrow leaves?
That's interesting. Matt, do you want to try and tackle that one?
Yeah. So all of that in furrow, I can't necessarily say anything with the nutrients, in my opinion, would cause those narrow leaves. I think that'd be more environment or a hybrid thing, potentially. As long as the rest of the plant looks okay and the roots are fine, I don't think there'd be any issue on the nutrient side of things. Greg, anything to add?
Yeah, that's where I would say first thing would be to look at the root structure and see how the roots are looking. Sometimes if we get root restrictions or if we have something that's feeding on the roots where we aren't getting nutrient uptake because of nematodes or rootworm or things of that sort, that can somewhat limit plant development. So I would look at the roots. The roots oftentimes tell the bigger story. And that may be interacting, as Matt said, with the genetics that's playing there, that it just doesn't have the supply at the fastest rate to support that cell division to get that plant to develop a larger system. And it may be interacting with the genetics in the background as well.
What kind of a yield drag could that potentially put on a plant, do you think?
That's really hard to say because there's so many things that's happening past that point.
Sure.
When the corn plant from germination to V2, it sets the first 15 kernels in length. Then from V3 to V5, it sets the girth. But then past that point, which would be when we would get out of this narrow leaf type scenario that I think he's mentioning, the rest of the 2/3 of the year is developed by other nutrition, environment, genetics, and so forth. So it's hard to say because there's too many factors coming in to put a yield drag number potentially on that, if there happens to even be one. It'd be hard to say.
Quick question from a personal point of view. Remember a couple of years ago, we had that big derecho event, went through the Corn Belt and just laid corn down for hundreds of miles. Also, in my case, numerous years, I had bad hailstorms. Have you found anything, and I'll ask you too, Matt, have you found anything that is maybe valuable in helping a crop recover from something like that?
So I'll start, Matt, and I'll let you go in from there. When we get those hail events, the two things that you have to deal with is, one, you have tissue damage. So you now have an open wound. So it's perfect for disease or insects to be opportunistic to take and eat the leaf or destroy the leaf because it's damaged.
Now, let me stop you right there. Should you take a tissue sample after that or not?
So that is not the greatest time to take a tissue sample.
Okay.
You need to wait at least until you have one new leaf growth above that.
Okay.
And then that would be the leaf that would need to be sampled for the nutritional standpoint.
Good.
The other thing that can be dealt with from a fungicidal standpoint or insecticide standpoint to help work through that tissue damage is usually a potassium application that tends to help in standability, particularly if it's got wind damage like you were mentioning earlier. Potassium does help in stalk strength, and it also has a role in disease. And then we come back to the infamous biologicals. Biologicals, some of those are made for stress events, and physical damage is a stress. And so when we get into things like on our world, which would be like Orbix or Megafol, those help mitigate those types of stresses. And so would be a perfect tank mix partner into that.
Interesting. Matt, have you run into this?
Yeah. So in my previous days as a sales rep, we had some hail events, and we didn't have Orbix at the time, but we had Megafol and ENC, and that was kind of our go-to thing. Wait till it at least gets some new growth, or starting to, right? We don't want to go out and spray it the day after it's still laying in the dirt. But we had some really good luck with just helping to get things moving again in that plant.
Interesting. All right, we want to go back to the phone lines. We have another caller on the line. We have Patrick calling in from Illinois. Patrick, thanks for calling in. What's your question for our panel?
Hello, good evening, gentlemen. Well, I'm with my Uncle Jimmy right now, and he wants to know when it's going to rain.
Well, that is a great question. I don't think we have the expert on our panel right now, but anyway, give me an idea. What are conditions like where you are then? How bad is it?
It's pretty dry. It's drier than a popcorn fart.
Well, I hear so much of that these days, and the drought conditions are really something that the crop, there again, you brought up the stress.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're probably going to be seeing evidence of that in your tissue samples you're taking right now, I imagine.
Yep, we're really starting, at least in the Midwest, we're really starting to get started taking them this week and the beginning of last week.
All right, Dustin, I want to bring you into this. So last year was a terrible drought year for some parts of the country. And I'm sure you ran into a lot of tissue samples that reflected that too.
We did.
What do you do about it? I mean, is there anything that can help the crops to deal with that stress?
So I think it's very important for us to understand when the correct time is to pull a tissue sample. You know, obviously if that plant is under a lot of stress and in a significant, drought environment, nutrient uptake through the roots is going to be highly limited. So it's really hard to gauge what's going on in the plant or what the possibility from the soil interaction with the nutrients to the plant actually is in an extreme drought situation. Last year, luckily, in southeast Missouri, we were able to actually capture some opportunity through our furrow irrigation that we have there, but the plants were still going through a lot of stress. And it wasn't just drought stress, it was also heat stress. And so a lot of the guys there, their management style is to fly on some nitrogen pre-tassel. And we knew the plants had been through a lot, heat stress and drought stress related, especially in that V8 to VT window. So we actually went out with a full-scale product with some of our Coron line as well to match up to try to help mitigate some of the plant stress that the plant had been going through while delivering a more functional solution of that biological type product with some micros and some nitrogen and potassium. And we saw some really good results out of it compared to just a straight dry commodity fertilizer in that application.
Now, on the other extreme, I mean, you're from the South and you work with crops like cotton and peanuts, I understand, too. And,
yes, sir.
And you have to deal with hurricane damage. Then you're talking about standing in water for a long time. That also creates stress.
Right.
Is that a different type of approach?
I might let Greg hit on that just a little in terms of water stress. Mm-hmm. But I will say that a lot of the guys in those areas try to manage for that opportunity to come. They're trying to get their crop in by a certain time. Right. They're trying to mitigate as many stressors as they possibly can to keep that crop growing at the stages that they want it to. And they're managing their cotton for that. They're managing for earliness. A lot of the peanuts are trying to get out by then. But, obviously in 2020, it was a wet year for a lot of people. And so, we were able to capture a lot of good corn yields, but there were some other crops that suffered from that excessive rainfall, especially early in the year, and then we had some later in the year as well. So I think there are a lot of products that we have that fall into a portfolio of being able to manage some of that excess moisture. I think the biggest thing is just trying to keep that plant healthy, looking at certain adjuvants with your fungicides and those type of excessive moisture environments where disease can be prevalent.
Good point. Good point. He wanted you to address this too, but I mean, even this year we've had, I'm thinking of Texas, 3 years, 4 years of consistent drought, and then they dumped 10 inches of rain on an area and now it's flooded.
Yes.
So there again, I mean, do you have a different approach if you look at flooded crops?
So in general, no, because it's, as Dustin said, it's a stress. And so you're looking for something to mitigate stress. Now, is there different products that are probably better on dry stress versus wet stress? Yes, and that's where working with people who know their products, that know what they have available to them, helps work into that to make the best recommendation. The other thing you have to worry about, we talked about dry, potassium being an issue. When we get wet, we have to worry about nitrogen. And nitrogen is a big environmental concern, but it's also a big cost concern because we don't want to lose the nitrogen because that's money that we lose. And so when we get in those wet environments, nitrogen becomes a problem. And So the general answer is yes, they're the same, but specifically there is a little bit of a tweak there that we have to take into concept.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of different options so far tonight on how to treat crops. How do you know the options work?
So that's one of the things that I think Helena separates us from a lot of different people in the market is our products go through a rigorous testing program. As I said earlier, we do a lot of work with universities. We do it with the private research companies. And so our products are thoroughly researched for up to 3 years before they're ever brought to market. So before a farmer ever sees a product, there's 3 years of replicated data that's behind it. We present at national meetings. Some things are published in scientific journals. And so we have this background of data. And the nice thing is we don't stop there. We continue to test those products throughout the life history of that product being used, whether it's through our locations, through field days, where they do research plots as part of their field days and collect data, or if it's through continuing working with those universities or private contractors and still accumulating that data and self-checking to make sure that things haven't changed because genetics have changed or environment has changed, to make sure that we have that consistent performance.
Well, I wish we had more time, like always, but in the minute or two that we have left here, I just want to go around the horn here. Give me 20 or 30 seconds of a final thought for each of you. Dustin, I'll start with you. Okay. What do you want to make for an impression on the viewers to leave them with?
So, Helena understands that farming has become incredibly complex, and achieving that ROI sometimes is getting more and more difficult. But products like Extractor and other products in our agri-intelligence portfolio are here to help make things easier for the grower. We want to be an asset on that acre. We want to provide the best solutions. We want to be able to be a part of solving any issues that he has in the field and any problems that he's maybe been dealing with for a while.
Matt, how about you?
Yeah, so tonight we talked about corn, soybeans, cotton, and wheat in regards to using Extractor, but just wanted to remind everybody we can use it on forages, fruits, tree, and nut crops. There's a lot of options out there.
That's a great point. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. How about you, Greg?
So I'm going to kind of go a different direction.
Okay.
I think the thing that we're in right now is we're in the middle of growing season. Some are at the beginning, some are at the end. We're doing post-chemical sprays. And so now is the time to be pulling those tissue samples, to be looking at those. And as we're applying those, we need to make sure they uptake. And a lot of things we don't think about is some work that we did at the University of Wisconsin. And we found out that adjuvants applied with nutritionals actually increase absorption and increase the performance. And there's been some work to show that with biologicals as well. So I got to say, don't forget the adjuvants in the tank, because that really brings everything together.
Real quickly, I mentioned the podcast. Who knows how to find the podcast?
Yeah, so we have a pretty awesome podcast. It's called the Field Link Podcast, and it has a lot of important information and timely topics throughout the growing season.
You can find it on Apple Podcast. And there's Spotify.
Amazon. Awesome. Well, guys, it's great having you come in. You're welcome back anytime. It's great to visit with you. Thanks for everything. And thanks for joining us on Rural America Live. And thanks for joining us on Rural America's most important network.